guys in the dark.
The setting. Taiwan. It was summer, and I was part of a program affiliated with a local college that teaches and tutors students in more advanced areas. We volunteered at a Catholic church in an area that I can only describe as halfway between a suburb and a larger city. So it wasn't out in the middle of nowhere, and people would pass by pretty frequently. Our particular group of volunteers was 15 strong, with 13 girls and 2 guys, including our male camp director, but our group consisted of 2 smaller subgroups. A group of 7 would teach at the church we were staying at, another would travel to a church in the next district over, and we would reconvene after classes at the church where we lived. This is important, as this meant throughout the day there would be times where only the volunteers would be left at the church. Our male camp director and the only priest would head over to assist the group at the other church. Our group also contained American volunteers teaching English, of which I was the leader. This meant we were able to communicate with the perpetrator, since he was not able to speak Mandarin well. We ended up living in the priest's office on the first floor, which was adjacent to our classroom. There was a door between the office and room that allowed us to go into the classroom without having to step outside. There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. Also, the doors would only be locked if the director was out or when we went to sleep. Taiwan is an extremely safe country. The crime rate is super low. So before you make fun of us for not locking doors or not being vigilant, remember this type of situation is pretty uncommon. We arrived at the church on a Friday to set up before classes started on Monday. The priest introduced us to a German man staying at the church. We were really busy, said our greetings, and continued working, so I don't think anybody caught more than a glance of him. At our welcome dinner that night, when I had a little more time to study, he was on the shorter side, bald and pudgy. He was also a permanent pink color, sweating profusely, and was always clutching a Taiwan beer in his paws. I was sitting across from him, and didn't feel an inclination to speak with him, but also didn't think anything was off about him. He was sitting next to our youngest American volunteer, though, so I gave him a few extra glances, which was when I noticed he seemed extremely talkative with her. She was giggling throughout the dinner, but through the chatter of our dinner party, I was unable to hear the conversation. That night after the party, the priest gave us a little more information. The German had just been kicked out of his home by his wife, and would be staying with us for a little bit while he figured out what to do next. He lived on the second floor of the church in a room next to the priest. The showers. It was already dark, with only a few flickering lights creating a checkered board pattern of light and dark on the hallway. Since we had so many volunteers and only one bathroom in the office to shower with, some of us chose to walk a little further to the kitchen to use their shower. As I swung my towel over my shoulder and poked my head out of the office door, I noticed the German sitting under one of the lights on the pews lining the hallway. It was dimmer where I was standing, but I could tell he lifted his head. As I walked towards him, there was finally some light so that I could see him more clearly. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, and I passed him, and for a few seconds I met his eyes. They were following me as I walked by, completely unblinking, with an expression I can only describe as dead. You know that feeling when you're sure someone's staring at you in the back? That's exactly what I felt as I passed him. And I walked into that kitchen. It sent a chill up my spine, but I didn't dwell on it. When I came out and walked back to the office, I could still feel his dead eyes trained on me. Probably had too much beer at the dinner party. The next evening, I was stuck showering at the kitchen again. As I walked out, a familiar sight, I nodded in acknowledgement to him, finished showering, and walked back to the office under his watchful eye. Out for the fresh air, I guess. And the next evening, there he was again. At this point, I was kind of expecting him. Gave him my cursory nod, and bounced into the kitchen. As I walked out, though, there was now 2 people sitting on the pew, none of them the German. It was my director and the other guy in my group sitting together. But my director was bouncing his leg fast and hunched over, running his hands up and down his leg. He snapped his head around when he heard me and jumped up, instantly untensing and letting out a sigh of relief. Were they waiting for me? He sheep-herded me in front of him and practically pushed me to the office. What the heck is going on? He shut the door behind us and deadlocked it faster than anyone could blink. The Wi-Fi. Facing our group, our director announced, "From now on, no one will be showering at the kitchen anymore. Do you understand?" I've been noticing him loitering around our room, and when I asked him why he was here this afternoon, he said because there was better Wi-Fi down here. I was pretty confused. The Wi-Fi is so spotty down here, I can't even stream the baseball matches. Addressing me, he continued, I brushed it off until XXX. Who went to the shower at the kitchen before you, came back and complained that the German's sitting out there and staring at her as she walked by. Something just felt weird, so I decided to wait outside for you to finish showering. The moment he saw us, the German stood up and left. It might not be anything, but I don't want any of you talking to him. If he seems to be acting weird, you have to tell me or the priest immediately. Someone piped up. Yes, he's always sitting around in front of our room. I see him whenever I fill up my water bottle outside. We were all shocked by the sudden turn of events, but we needed to get preparations done. Tomorrow was Monday, the first day of teaching. The X-Acto knife. Monday rolled around. Everything was going smooth with no sight of the German until afternoon recess. He entered the compound with a large sack of items, some random household appliances, and a small table. He'd probably gone to collect his belongings from his home. He set down his table and began piling all his belongings in the sack onto the table in front of the crowd of our students. They mostly seemed to be tools. At the very top of his pile, gingerly laid out the largest X-Acto knife I've ever seen. The hilt was the size of my hand, from finger to wrist. It was alarmed, mostly because I wasn't sure if he should be showing off a giant knife in front of young students. He seemed to relish the students oohing at his knife. The coffee machine. After putting his tools back into the sack, he whipped out a black coffee machine, pointing to the small paper sign tacked to the front with German writing. He told me it was a practice of his to serve free coffee. If I wanted free coffee, he kept telling me, I would have to help him plug it in. I declined a few times, as I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but he kept pushing. I know you want the coffee, he said, as he winked at me. He tried to hand me the cord while directing me to the string the cord through the window into the classroom, where there was an outlet. By this time, I was a little weirded out by how much he was pushing for the coffee, and why he needed to use the outlet in the classroom when there was another outlet in the kitchen. It did occur to me for a second that there would be a very smart ruse to get us to keep the window open, but I brushed it off. Where did I think I was? A mystery novel? I declined by saying that I had to set up for class, and left right as the bell rang, saved by the bell. I did make a mental note to watch out for the damn coffee machine later, but when you're surrounded by too many kids, and tired to the bone every day, you tend to forget things. The wires. Following the coffee machine debacle, he busted out a stepladder. He climbed up and began messing with the wires running near the ceiling outside of the hallway. And as the day progressed, his stepladder seemed to slowly migrate towards our office door. The priest was equally as confused, and when he pressed the man, his reply was that he was cleaning the ceiling. The priest just shrugged and let him carry on. Those wires are mostly obsolete except for the ones controlling the hallway lights. The priest told me this, so it didn't matter much. The AC. After all the kids had left for the day, our camp director and the priest left us to go check the group teaching at the other church, and to go pick them up. We all hit our naps in the office. Feeling refreshed, I decided to go outside to get some water. When I opened our door, I almost ran headfirst into the German stepladder. His ladder was right in front of our office door, trapping us inside. He climbed down and put his arm on our door frame. I was stuck halfway out of the door, holding it slightly ajar so I wouldn't have to be too close. He kept sneaking glances inside while he questioned me about our AC. One of our volunteers had told him the AC was broken and needed fixing, he said. I was confused as our AC had been blasting fine all day. In fact, I had just turned it off. It was getting a little too cold. I told him there was nothing wrong with it. He insisted. No, there was definitely something wrong with the AC, and that he needed to go inside to fix it. We went back and forth a few times until I firmly told him he was mistaken. It must be some other AC unit, and that he did not need to go inside. I saw him inching forward into the room, so I leaned back into our room and shut the door in his face. He knocked angrily a few times and then left. My alarm bells were fully ringing now. In hindsight, I'm hanging out around our office all day. Meant he knew both the priest and the director had left, and it was just us left in the office. His latter also seemed to be quite well placed. That night, the nun came up to me and quietly told me to warn the others to be careful around the German. When I pressed her, she just said that he would be leaving soon. At dinner, the priest also announced that the German had been asked to leave in 2 days, which was Wednesday, and in a halting manner. Told us to be careful around him. By this time, I knew something was wrong, so I shared my AC story. Everyone was adamant that they hadn't said anything about our AC to the German, which just confirmed our suspicions. And I was starting to feel worried with how the situation was progressing. I've always felt like the priest and nuns knew more than they let on. The plug. Later in the evening, after showering, I headed next door to our classroom to blow dry my hair. There was about 5 of us in the classroom together, and someone was already using the first blow dryer. As I reached to grab the second blow dryer and flicked it on, nothing happened. It was not plugged in. What the hell? Why would you unplug this thing? I jokingly admonished my friend. There was already something plugged into the outlet, but they weren't sure what it was, so they didn't want to touch it. My friend just told me this. I looked at the outlet and saw both spaces were occupied. A cold hand gripped my heart. Lifting our heavy curtains back, I saw a cord running out of our window into the darkness beyond. His coffee extension cord. I pulled the cord in as I swore. I wasn't sure if it was his cord, but shakingly, I told them about his coffee machine, and that perhaps his coffee cord was a ruse to keep our window slightly ajar so he could climb in at night. We shook the metal grill, which still seemed firmly stuck on the wall, and shut the window. At 11 that night, half of us was in the office playing games, while my group was in the classroom having a meeting with our director. The light in the office suddenly shut off. "What the heck," my group member muttered. "Why would they go to sleep right now? It's only 11. We did have a group member with a cold, so I said maybe they went to sleep early for her. Before I could finish that sentence, the door between the office and the classroom opened, and 2 of our members motioned furiously for the director. He went to them, and we all watched as they conversed in harsh whispers. Then he disappeared in the dark office with them. Boom, the door to the classroom from the outside slammed open, reverberating off the wall. The German paced in slowly, looking smug with a Taiwan beer in his hand, the expression frozen with fear. Absolutely true here. We all stood there completely frozen. I glanced around at my group members. Our mouths were all open and closing dumbly. I made some feeble attempts at saying our director's name and trying to move my legs. All the while, the German took his swig of a beer, smiling at us. "Close the lights," he said. "I want you to close the lights." Then he turned around just as the director burst back into our room. "Get out," the director yelled in Mandarin. The German whipped around and stared at our director with rage. But in the most monotone and expressionless voice, he replied, "I don't understand Chinese," and walked out the door, shutting it behind him. We hurried to lock the classroom door and then rushed back into the office. Close to tears, the people in the office told us that while we were holding our meeting in the classroom, they saw the doorknob turn. The German burst in and told them the same thing. Close the lights. Then he shut the light for them and left. They were too afraid to turn it back on, so 2 of them ran to the classroom to let our director know, which was when the German showed up in the classroom. Our director called the priest and told him about what happened. The priest agreed to come downstairs to try to figure out this mess. After an hour of muffled arguing, he convinced the German to go back up the 2nd floor and sleep. We argued for a bit about what to do next considering our circumstances. He had a giant X-Acto knife, I reminded everyone, but we were a large group. There's no way he could take us all on. We could leave, someone suggested, but we had nowhere else to stay. We could call the police, but what would we tell them? Someone living with us had walked into our unlocked rooms and closed the lights. It sounded like a practical joke. Also, he was probably drunk at the time. In the end, we decided to reinforce our doors. We didn't have anything to effectively barricade our doors. Everything was either too heavy or too light, so we grabbed some bamboo sticks we had laying around and propped it between the door and desk to prevent him from opening our door easily. We decided to close our lights and try to go to sleep. Needless to say, no one was willing to fall asleep. I watched the window. Since this was an office, there was no curtain to the window. Through the light outside, we could see everyone passing by as a shadowy form. An hour passed. Then someone loudly whispered, "The door! The door!" The light from the hallway glinted off the doorknob. It slowly turned left, then right. "It's locked." Then the German gave up, roared, and started ramming the door with his body. The bamboo stick quivered with every thrust. Then it stopped, and he reappeared, pacing back and forth in front of our window behind me. Someone started sobbing. Quiet again. Then we hear angry roars coming from further down the hall. When that fails, he begins shaking all the grills, finally reappearing in front of our window and shaking that. The director sprung up, opened the lights, and announced that we were calling the police through the door. The German stopped banging on our door, but then he began yelling about our lights. "Close the lights! Close the lights! It's bothering me! I can see it! Close the lights!" He screamed over and over again, sounding more desperate with each second. My group members asked me what he's saying. He's speaking English, and they aren't sure what they're hearing. We see the police's sirens minutes later. So does the German. He leaves. A few minutes later, the police knock on our door and tell us to open up. The German was found hiding in the church. The priest and the other police officers were trying to talk sense into him at the moment. Technically, since the German hasn't committed any crimes they can charge him for, the police cannot bring him to the station and throw him in a jail cell for the night. The best they can do, they say, is try to get him into the car so they can drop him off somewhere else. Our director was outside giving his statement to the police. We peeked out through the crack in the door. The German shuffled out of the church handcuffed and saw the director looking at him. He instantly tried to run for our director while snarling, You ruined it all," in Mandarin. He slammed to the ground and screamed for a little while. Then the police dragged him to the cop car and threw him in. They call us to let us know that they've dropped him off, at the park a street away. He shouldn't be bothering us anymore, they tell us, which is not comforting for anyone at all. We tried to go back to sleep. Our director assumed his position as our sentry and situated himself behind the desk adjacent to the office door, cross-legged, watching over us. He and our only other male member would trade off every 2 hours. He told us not to worry, but the lengths that we were going through told us otherwise. We all knew he would most likely be back. About another hour later, we hear rustling noises coming from our bathroom. We have another window in there. Our director goes in and yells, "Go away!" He looked out the window, but didn't see anyone. We were all convinced it was him. The police are useless, so no point in calling them again. It stops after about 15 minutes, but we stay awake till the next morning. We never saw the German again, and through the exhaustion of the daily lives, we've never mentioned again either. We did, however, to religiously lock our doors. The priest cleaned out the German's room and put all the stuff in front of the room in case he ever wanted to come back and take it. The X-Acto knife was never located, though. On the last day, our youngest American admitted to me that during the conversation at the dinner party, the German kept talking about the tattoos of his son on his body. He said they were in areas hidden by his clothing, and he wanted to show her. He kept trying to lift his shirt, but she kept refusing him. So he said later on, if she wanted, she could come find him, and he would show her. Frankly, she's the dimmest light bulb that I've ever met, so her not catching the underlying message was unsurprising. Thankfully, she wasn't particularly interested in his tattoos and forgot all about it. So she never pursued it further. But what would happen if she did? I think the scariest part for me is the kitchen showers. I'm not really afraid of many things, so when I showered, I didn't open the kitchen lights, just the bathroom. The door leading into the kitchen wasn't locked, and none of the knives were secured. Looking back, if he really wanted to, he could have done something while I was coming out of there. The group would have been none the wiser until after an hour or two. In hindsight, he had so many opportunities to hurt us, but never did until he tried to break into our office. So I think a large part of the puzzle is still missing, namely his motive and what he was actually planning to do once he got into the office. Although I think being mentally ill and drunk contributed to his issues. As I pondered this incident now, I wonder why no one ever talked more about it. It was done and out. Now for the cherry on top. The next morning, one of my students told me while giggling that on the way here, they saw a bald white guy running around with clothing. I'm not sure he was completely naked, but that would explain why we never saw him again. Public nudity is definitely a crime. Who knows, though? There are some more lighthearted and miscellaneous moments I didn't include, including with a side effect of him messing with those wires. I'd like to think I have a pretty decent instinct now that it comes to knowing who has bad intentions. But I wasn't always as cautious and observant as I am now. When I was in high school, I always felt so ugly. I had low self-esteem and anxiety, which was really more of a problem rather than my looks. So if anyone of the opposite sex gave me even a little attention, I would start to look like them. I was pretty innocent, despite now how desperate I was. Having only kissed one boy, so when I was 17 and a college guy put interest into me, I immediately clung to him. I was on this app, and I met a guy who lived 7 hours away from my home. His name was Brandon, and he was gorgeous. Blonde hair, muscular, blue eyes. He played soccer for his university and was 19 years old. Honestly, he wasn't my usual type. I really liked guys with darker hair and eyes. I still do, but he was really handsome and really kind. He would shower me with compliments and talk to me all the time. I lived alone in an apartment with just my cats, so when I would get lonely or scared, he always comforted me. A month into talking, he started asking for pictures, not ones of my face, but obviously nudes or bra pictures. Now this was nearly 6 years ago, and I didn't have a good concept of stranger danger on the internet. I mean, smartphones had only been around for about 2 or 3 years at this point. 17-year-old me, who was so insecure, wanted to make him happy because I couldn't believe I had gotten a guy like him. I was ready to do anything he asked. I never sent naked pictures. I was too insecure for that. But I would send pictures of me in my bra. He would shower me with compliments, saying how sexy and beautiful I was, and I fell for every word. With time, I started to get upset, though. I wanted to see him. I would always send him pictures when he asked, but he never sent me any. He would show my body pictures of him with his shirt off or things, but the pictures were always of bad quality. When I started getting too persistent, he promised he would start calling me. For some reason, this appeased me, and we'd talk many times a week. After a couple of months, he got increasingly more sexual with me, telling me that he wanted to do things with me and how badly he wanted me. This made me nervous, since I had never kissed a boy, but it almost made me a little excited. It felt good to be wanted by someone I had really grown to like. This was all during the first semester of my senior year of high school, and I was going to turn 18 the next semester in late January. As it got to Christmas time, he started to talk about coming to my city to see me for my birthday. This had me really excited since I wanted to see him in person so badly. We had first talked about me going to him, something he had insisted on, but I chickened out and said I couldn't do the drive alone. We planned on a weekend after my birthday, and everything seemed fine. But then one day in my choir class, my best friend, an exchange student from Germany, was talking with me about him. I was telling her about him and showing pictures, and she got very unsettled. "Have you seen him on video?" I told her no, and she gave me a skeptical look. "Something doesn't feel right. There is no way he is real. Not that you couldn't date someone like him, but he is just too perfect." She was very direct and blunt with me about it, something my other friends weren't. So I took her word deeply, and I'm so thankful that I did. I immediately asked him for a picture of his face. He made up some excuse about how he couldn't take a picture right then, so I persisted, asking every day. Finally, my instincts were kicking in, and I was getting scared. I told him I wanted to video call him. He said no. I fought him on it for hours one night, telling him that if he tells me the truth, I won't get mad. He refused. I put the name he gave me into Facebook, determined to find him on my own if he wasn't going to give in. Nothing came up on him. I texted him telling him I couldn't find his Facebook, and he gave in, giving me a completely different name, and told me, "That's me." I remember just feeling cold as I read that. I looked up the account, and everything he had told me was a lie. His name, his face, his age. He was 25, not 19. I was terrified. I thought I had been talking to someone just 2 years older, which is legal in my state, but he was 8 years older. I immediately stopped texting him. That's when he started getting obsessive. He would text me dozens of times a day, call me over and over again. He would beg me to answer him, to give him a chance. Then he started threatening me to answer. He told me he had saved all of my pictures. He kept them all and told me he would send them to my friends and family on Facebook. Show everyone me in my bra and show our text messages talking about what he would do to me sexually if we met. Looking back, all of that was more damaging to me than to him. But I was young and stupid and afraid. I hated my body so much, and I was terrified of people seeing it. So I started talking to him again, more reserved and cautious this time. The days inched closer to my birthday, and the weekend we had planned. Our messages had become bland and short since I was trying to make him lose interest in me, but he never gave up. If I took too long to message, then he would threaten me again. My birthday fell on a Monday that year, and he sent me all kinds of messages. I don't even remember what I did that birthday. I didn't have many friends, and I've never liked to celebrate, so it was probably just small. When Friday hit, I got a text message from him that morning saying that he was driving to my city, that he would pick me up from school. I was terrified. I had lost a lot of my friends the semester before, so they obviously had no clue of my situation. Out of desperation, I went to one of my guy friends who I hadn't talked to in a couple of months and spilled everything to him. He was a longtime friend, so he was sympathetic and promised to follow me home that day. I went straight to my car, ignoring the mass amount of text messages saying, "Where are you?" and "I'm here." My friend drove behind me all the way to my apartment, which he had no clue I was living in, and stayed with me as I cried for a while. I turned my phone off, and my friend left later in the night. Brandon had no clue where I lived, but I was still paranoid. What if he somehow found me? Only 3 people knew where I lived, 4 now with my guy friend, and he didn't come in contact with any of them. When I finally turned my phone on, he was threatening me again. I was so exhausted and fed up. I started spam texting him, yelling and venting. I told him how stressed he made me, and how what he was doing is wrong. I told him to send the pictures, and that I didn't care anymore. I started to attack his character, telling him how no one could love him if he hides who he is, then threatens people like that. Thankfully for me, he had enough care for me to take my words to heart. He apologized, and told me that he deleted all of my pictures. He swore to leave me alone as long as we can still talk every once in a while as friends. I agreed, even though I knew that I was lying. I talked to him for a month, short responses, until he finally just gave up. Even now at 22, I still see his name appear sometimes. I blocked his number and deleted him on everything, but his name still shows up sometime on my Instagram or Snapchat when he is trying to re-add me. He's the reason I don't give my name or picture out. He isn't the first stalker I experienced. The first was when I was in 6th grade, but that's a story for another time. To Brandon, who lied and collected underage pictures of me, then threatened me with them, let's not meet. Middle-aged female creeper here. Big creep experience. I might offer a bit of insight as to how I went down this wrong path. My dad was a large, very dominating presence. His word was absolute law, and you could be hit or verbally belittled during any discourse with him. To him, every thought I had was incorrect just because it was mine. Any social situation that went awry, I was always at fault, just because I was me. I was told to shut up and follow other people, regardless of whether what they were doing or engaged in is worthwhile or not. My questions were met with "none of your business" or "you don't know what you're talking about." I was kicked up the stairs and hit in the face repeatedly by him, once about 20 times in a row. After the divorce from my mom, he paid the barest minimum in child support. My mom did not want to get a real job. We kids went to school in soiled, ragged clothes, of any which we had very few. Classmates taunted me. I was the dirty girl at school that nobody liked. People would yell, "Take a bath with soap tonight," or some things like that. I even had a bully that would ride by me on a motorcycle and try to rip out my hair, or just flat try to run me down. He and his friends ambushed me, and he hit me in the face with a book and threw all my stuff around the street. My loud mom developed a very strange need to be the center of attention. What few friends I did have, she would monopolize when I had over, like she was competing with me for them. She asked one girl to spend the night. That friend said to me, "That's kinda weird." I never had someone's mom ask me to sleep over before. At the school, Mom would smoke, go braless, and be the loudest person on the scene, like she wanted everyone to look at her. Then she would mock me for not having enough friends, while I stood there humiliated in my filthy clothes. By my mid-teens, I was about mute outside of the very few friends I was used to. I was physically unattractive to boot, so could not make the dating scene. However, I did develop teenage crushes. I knew I had no chance with these guys, but I wanted to be in their orb somehow. My friends would help me case their residences. We would go into the woods behind their homes at night and watch the going-ons through the windows. We'd see family members peering outside the windows, trying to determine what was afoot on their lawns. Since we had darkness on our side, we were never spotted. It must have been very unsettling for them. We spied on at least 3 different guys for me, and even put letters in some of the mailboxes. I checked out their workplaces and scanned for their cars. I can't put a number on how many hang-up phone calls I did just to hear their voices. This was before stalking became a thing. I knew I was guilty of trespassing, but back then I looked upon our forays onto people's private property as no more serious than a parking violation. It took many years before I totally got the importance of respecting other people's personal spaces. Due to my boundaries having been breached by my father's physical abuse and dominance, my mom with her invasions into my social relationships, and bullies encroaching me on physical and emotionally when I was just that clueless, plus the years of rejection due to my involuntary lack of personal hygiene and shabby garments left me with literally no social abilities. My creepy behavior continued into college. I had to move out of the dorm due to my roommates being put off by my creep aura. I kept making the mistakes of being needy, clingy, and oversharing. I was so intimidated I was stone silent on some days. I tried an apartment with some add-on roommates. One found my constant presence so cringy, she told me that I was like a pet dog because I was always home. Finally, I took to living alone. I fell in love with the freedom from the looks that I used to get due to non-existent social lives. Oddly, I never felt bored or lonely, just liberated with plenty of choices, loads of peace of mind. In fact, I was pretty happy and good on staying permanently single since I had long given up the idea of marrying. The only problem was I still wanted a baby, and my creep factor remained an obstacle. I tried to sign on to a sperm bank that would service single women. I had passed all the physical tests and went on to the interview with their psychiatrist. I guess her creep radar went off, and she told me outright that she would recommend against the clinic signing me on as a client without giving me a clear reason. I was devastated and considered suicide. Then I dusted myself off and sallied forth. After 6 years of nonstop shoulder to the wheel, I became a mom by the traditional path and have several children. Determined for them to live a normal life, I made darn sure that they were well groomed with plenty of clean, attractive clothes. I set the example of being well behaved and reserved in public. I made it a point to stay out of their social lives unless there was a strong reason for me to get involved. There seldom was. I think this somewhat hands-off approach I took towards their relationships and friendships paid off for them. Today, they are older teenagers with good relationship skills, jobs, and in college, high grades, never in trouble with drugs, drinking, or the law. Unfortunately, I think I still gave off a creep vibe to most of their parents. There have only been a handful of times where another mom invited me and the kids for fun time with her and her children. I had really hoped for lots of this mommy time with other moms, and I am a bit sad that I barely got to enjoy any. Most other parents seemed to welcome my kids to hang with theirs, as long as their weirdo mom kept my distance. Yep, still a member of the creep set after all these years, but at least I no longer act out in full creep mode. I have given up the yard, business, vehicle, and phone surveillance I carried out as an obsessive teen. I truly am sorry that I peeped in windows and stalked. My people skills are probably only about 70% of a normal person on my best days, so I have to come a good ways from my absolute zero. I stood at it as a young adult, but maybe most importantly, my respect of others' boundaries is now solid. I had just met a man, who I will call Joe. At my request, I decided to meet in a Chicago bar with a group of my friends back in October of 1999. We talked, drank, danced a little bit. Much like many college students, we were enjoying a night out. He seemed pretty cool when I had first met him, the first couple of times. Yet that night of fun had turned into a prolonged nightmare for me. At the time, I was a university graduate student. I never filed a police report about the case. Joe had told me that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me within just a month of being near each other. I decided to back away from him, telling him that I didn't feel the same way that he did. Joe persisted in his attempts to woo me. He had followed me wherever I went. He cried a lot as he begged me to accept him. He would whisper on the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning that he loves me, and then proceed to tell me that I'm very beautiful. It has been 4 years. You'd think that he would take the hint by now. When I had met him, I made it very, very clear to him that I was not looking for a serious relationship. We only went out just a few times, but he kept on calling me and wanting to see me. He said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me, but didn't believe in marriage. He had told me that he was new to Chicago and had 3 months left on a temporary job. I later found out that he doesn't have a job. He moves from place to place. He hated Chicago, but was ready to live there just for me. I kept telling him, and I tried to make it clear to him numerous times, that I did not feel the same way that he felt. He refused to accept my rejections. When I started dating other men, Joe had accused me of not wanting a relationship with him because he was black. I tried telling him that his race had no impact on my feelings for him. His personality alone was prone to changing within a matter of moments. One night while we were hanging out, my car happened to get towed. He insisted on paying for it. When I didn't let him, he got angry and then just left. Later on that night, Joe had told me that he wished that I would die. Mind you, one moment he would be saying that he loves me, and then when I would not say it back, he would say that I was a horrible person and didn't think about other people's feelings. Joe ended up moving to Wisconsin in January of 2000, and I thought that I was rid of him for good. But then he started to show up in Chicago, frequenting the places that I usually visited. I even had a guy pretending to be my husband call him once to kind of help in throwing him off of my back. Joe knew my daily routine and found me no matter where I went. I saw him in a bar one night. He started telling me that I was lying, that I didn't love him. He was upset that I was not returning any of his feelings. He used to even bring girls to his home, then call me from the neighboring room while the girls were asleep. Even though he knew his actions would upset me, he kept insisting that he would give up all his bad habits if I would just accept him in my life. Despite constantly telling him that I wasn't interested in pursuing a relationship with him, he just continued to contact me. Between September and October of 2001, Joe had called me almost constantly, But then he stopped calling for the next 3 months when he realized that I was not going to answer any of his phone calls. Soon after, the calls once again had picked up. Even though I happened to have caller ID, I would not know when he was calling, as he would call from a different number every single time. He wasn't taking any of the hints. In between all the phone calls, he would move from one state to another, change jobs pretty frequently. Throughout the time that he had stalked me, I continued to date other people. Eventually, one of my boyfriends had tried to call Joe, but since he moved so often, it was difficult to contact him. One of my friends had advised me to hang up the phone as soon as I recognized Joe's voice, but he started to leave strange messages on my phone. My mother had once heard a message saying that I love you at home. My mother did know about him to some extent, and thought that he was a psycho. Somehow my mom really never insisted on calling the police. My mom is the kind of handle-it-yourself type of person, made cracks about it once or twice. I never called the cops to get Joe off my trail, because I didn't think that he was capable of hurting anyone. I did threaten him a few times, telling him that I would contact the authorities if he did persist bothering me. I never thought that he would do anything harmful. Once Joe realized that his phone calls weren't getting his message across, he decided to turn to a new method of communication. He started to mail letters to me. It's not like he would mail a regular letter. I would know immediately that it was him when I saw his letters without even opening them. He would write "I love you" on the covers, and each had a top 10 list. Sometimes the list would describe qualities about me that Joe found very attractive, like a list of my good qualities, or the reasons that Joe would love me. He even wrote letters to my family. I became wary on my family's behalf as I was living with them. He even sent a letter to my best friend. That letter even asked my best friend to treat me well and take care of me. During the time that I was dating other people, his obsession became even more serious. He would show up at random times. I decided to move to Georgia, but I kept the same cell phone number until January of 2003. That was when Joe's last directly contacted me. It sucks when you have to change what you do. I thought that I could keep the same cell number after changing states, because it would be hard to give anyone back home my new number. I'm still pretty scared that somehow, some way he's going to figure out where I am. If people really want to find you, they can. You know, looking back on all this and recalling my actions, I was too nice. I definitely let it go on longer than I wanted it to. As a result of the stalking, I'm now cautious around men, and I'm careful with forming new friendships because Joe really scared me. I go through phases where I get weary of guys. I tell my boyfriends, don't call me every single day. I still am like that sometimes. I will back off if someone gets too close. Joe still contacts my family back in Chicago to find out information about me. If I heard from him today, I would freak out. My heart would just stop. I would say to anybody who has a stalker, contact authorities. If you happen to be on campus, they provide several prevention tips for students who may have the possible victims of stalking. You can also request your name and address to be withheld from the student directory. There's also numbers that you can call. That way you can stay anonymous. Also, if you think you're being followed while in your car, you can make 4 successive left or right turns. If the car continues to follow you, just drive to the nearest police station. Never go home or to a friend's house. You can take self-defense class. There are also courses that can teach awareness and prevention tips as well as techniques to make attendees more aware of their surroundings and to avoid confrontations at the same time. I work in retail, and this is how I met my stalker. I knew him as a regular when I first started working there. He was like this cute guy, and I would sell him the pitch, but never would speak to him as much. And then he started coming in more and more. He would talk to me a lot about things. Eventually he had asked me to go out with him, like for coffee or for lunch, but I declined. I did like him though. I thought that he was attractive, so I gave him my Instagram account. My mistake. I'm 18 years old, and I'm still in high school, graduating this year, and he was 22. Even my mother, when I told her, was not very happy that I was talking to someone older than me. but I talked with him anyways. So we talked for a couple of weeks. He was really nice and respectful. My coworkers really didn't like how he was older than me and thought that it was weird. Like, why is a 22-year-old talking to an 18-year-old in high school? And gave him looks constantly when he would come into the store. He would ask me almost every single day when I was going into work. I was never comfortable talking to him about that kind of stuff, and I would try switching the subject. He would usually give me the, "Oh, well, I miss you, and I really want to see you eventually." I thought that it was weird too. About our age gap. The fact that he wanted to see me every single day. So in the most fucked up way, I ended things over text message. Yeah, I know I suck. I told him I wasn't interested in talking anymore because of our age gap, and I was really busy with life. I needed to focus on school, which was all true. He was really mad and told me to stop texting him. I did. He stopped looking at my stories on Instagram, and I thought that that was the end of it, until he texted me. I was sick at the time. I had come down with this cold and had a sore throat, terrible migraines. It probably had been a week or two after I stopped talking to him. He asked to speak with me, and I responded like this. Like over the phone or in person? He replied, "In person. Your mom will get the wrong idea over the phone." My mother wouldn't like that, and I wouldn't feel comfortable meeting in person either. Yeah, I should have known you would have said no. You're just that kind of person. When he sent that, I got pissed off. He made me feel like I wasn't willing to hear his side of the story. So I responded, "Look, man, I'm really sick, and it wouldn't be right to see you sick. And also, you should respect my boundaries of not seeing you. I'm not comfortable with meeting you alone." He responded, "That's completely understandable, and I'm so sorry. Please get better soon." That's the last time that he texted me. The next day, my coworker had texted me. This is how it went. "Hey, so your stalker is here. I think he's looking for you." "No, maybe he's looking for a t-shirt." "No, girl, he's not even looking at the clothing. He's looking through the back door, seeing if you're back there." I was terrified reading that. I know that's common saying that, but literally my heart had dropped. I had the worst panic attack, and I was scared to go into work the very next day. Luckily, I didn't see him for a while, until today. He was in the store with a friend. They were flirting right in front of me when I was greeting them and pitching the sale. The stalker wouldn't even look directly at me. He was annoyingly coming up to me and asked me for help, still not looking at me. I was pissed off, feeling secondhand embarrassment because the stalker was thinking that he was doing something flirty with his friend. Then after he paid for the stuff, he came up to me and said, "I feel like I offended you. I'm sorry if I did." I literally wanted to tell him that I knew what he did was creepy. It was that he came in looking for me, and how rude he was to me when I was helping him. But I said that I didn't care. But he should know to be nicer, because he was being so rude to me when I was trying to help him. Then he left, saying, "Oh, my bad. Goodbye." Then he decides to come back into the store, says that I want to talk to you. I turn myself directly towards him and stare him in the eyes. And then I say, "Okay." I was going to give this guy a piece of my mind. He said, "Did you really break it off because of our age gap?" I told him yes. He asked, "Is there any chance of me and you in the future?" I told him no. He left right after that. Writing this now, I wish that I told him that he made me feel scared. Especially when I was going into work. The way that he was stalking me was really fucking creepy. I hope that he knows what he did was fucking terrible. I had nightmares of him following me to my car and hurting me. I looked around my shoulder constantly when I was on my break. Because of you, you made me scared to go to work every single day. To the young ladies working, be cautious of who you're giving your information to. And no more messages to my stalker. Go fuck yourself, and never come back into my workplace ever again. This story takes place when I was around 16 or 17 years old. I lived with my dad in a little apartment in a very questionable area. It was the type of area you'd not want to be out in and when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 or 11 p.m. There would be a cop or two in the area patrolling, making sure that there was no gang-related activity going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train was a couple of blocks away from my house. Since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work around 3 p.m. and would usually get home around 12 or 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week, aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night, when I got out of work late because some asshole wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour, so having nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me, so when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit, I assumed that he was another drunken hobo in the city trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I've just seen him on the train here before. He made his way over to me, much to my discomfort, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late, all by myself. I had to reply as not to anger him. I mean, we were alone, and he was close enough to me to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him that I was waiting for the train. He asked me which one. Now, the train was color-coded with a strip on the top to indicate whether it was going north, south, east, or west areas. I took blue, but I lied and said that I took green. He looked at the schedule above the benches and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said that he would keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at So-So Restaurant. This made my blood run cold. I never told him where I worked, so I looked at him and very timidly answered, "For about a year." He laughed. He said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew that I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. Nope, he suddenly told me that he took the green train too, so he followed me on and sat in a seat right behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try and do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me, in some way or other, but we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't many people riding the train at that hour. Our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in a menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train, and the man followed me, as expected. I took a seat on the bench next to hers, close enough for her to see and hear everything going on, hoping that she would catch on. The man had noticed that I was sniffling, allergies, and being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. Now this went on until a blue train came, and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there." Made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he would face us, and stared at me the entire time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried that he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me that his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man was still watching me, started to smile widely, resembling the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond, and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.